January 17, 1944. Camp Swift near Bastrop, Texas. The sun rose slowly over central Texas, spilling a pale winter light across rows of wooden barracks that stretched with geometric precision across the landscape, framed by pine trees untouched by war and skies unscarred by contrails or smoke. A thin frost still clung to the ground, fragile and fleeting, destined to disappear within the hour. Inside Barracks Block C, Gefreiter Karl-Heinz Meller, formerly of the Wehrmacht's 71st Infantry Division, sat on the edge of his bunk in silence, boots already laced, hands resting on his knees. He had awakened before the guards, before the roll call, guided by a habit formed on distant fronts where dawn had always meant danger. In Russia, morning had brought artillery. In Ukraine, it had brought hunger. In France, it had brought hurried marches and exhausted withdrawals. Here, in Texas, dawn brought something entirely unfamiliar: routine. The sound reached him first, drifting across the camp with calm regularity. The hollow metallic rhythm of mess trays being stacked, the scrape of benches on wooden floors, the low, steady murmur of hundreds of men gathering without urgency. Then came the smell. Bacon rendered slowly, fresh bread warming, coffee thick and dark poured in quantities he had not seen since before the war. When Meller stepped into the mess hall, he stopped. Long tables stretched across the room, already filled. Bread, white, soft, sliced into identical pieces by machines operating somewhere far beyond his imagination, sat in open baskets. Eggs were served whole, not powdered, not diluted. Meat appeared not as a weekly privilege, not as a rationed exception, but as a daily certainty. No one watched portions, no one counted slices. They were leftovers. For a man who had watched comrades collapse from malnutrition outside Kharkov, this was not comfort. It was disorientation. In that moment, without maps or briefings, the war shifted shape. Not on a battlefield, but in the mind.
Historical context. By 1944, Germany was no longer fighting merely the Allied armies. It was fighting the limits of its own system. The Reich had mobilized millions of men, but it had failed to mobilize its economy with the same ruthlessness or coherence. Early victories had masked structural weaknesses, an industrial base divided by regional inefficiencies, a logistics doctrine that underestimated scale, and an ideological leadership that resisted full economic transformation until it was too late. Civilian consumption had been preserved for years out of political calculation, while factories operated below potential and transportation networks strained under contradictory priorities. Even the later reforms under Albert Speer, often cited as evidence of German efficiency, arrived too late and operated within constraints that could not be undone. Germany lacked strategic depth. Its railways were vulnerable. Its fuel sources were finite. Its agriculture depended increasingly on forced labor and shrinking inputs. By contrast, the German soldiers captured in North Africa, Italy, and Normandy arrived in captivity already accustomed to scarcity. Ammunition shortages dictated tactics. Fuel shortages dictated retreats. Food shortages dictated morale. Across the Atlantic, the United States had approached the war not as an ordeal to be endured, but as a problem to be solved. Entry into the conflict triggered not improvisation, but expansion. Civilian industries were converted wholesale. Automobile plants became tank factories. Appliance manufacturers produced aircraft components. Railroads were synchronized, standardized, and protected. Agriculture was not stripped to feed the military, it was mechanized to feed everyone. When German prisoners arrived in the United States, they did not enter a nation under strain. They entered a system operating at full momentum. Material and industrial development. By mid-1945, The United States held approximately 371,000 German prisoners of war, distributed across more than 500 camps spanning nearly every state. These camps were not isolated outposts. They were embedded within an existing national infrastructure that had already been scaled for mass movement, mass production, and mass supply. Feeding and housing enemy soldiers did not require emergency measures. It required scheduling. American regulations mandated that prisoners of war receive rations equivalent to U.S. soldiers, roughly 3,700 calories per day. This requirement did not strain the system, it revealed its depth. In 1944 alone, the United States produced nearly 100,000 aircraft, tens of thousands of armored vehicles, millions of trucks, and quantities of steel and aluminum that exceeded the combined output of several Axis powers. Food production not only met domestic demand, but sustained Allied forces overseas and supplied civilian populations.
Railroads ran without interruption across a continent untouched by bombing. Refrigerated rail cars carried meat thousands of miles without spoilage. Grain silos in the Midwest filled faster than they could be emptied. Warehouses expanded not because of shortage, but because of overflow. For German POWs assigned to farm labor, the experience was transformative. They harvested fields larger than entire districts back home. They watched tractors replace animal labor entirely. They saw machines compress days of work into hours. One prisoner recorded simply, "They do not count food here, they calculate it." Life inside the camps followed a rhythm that contrasted sharply with the chaos of the front. Barracks were heated in winter and ventilated in summer. Clothing was replaced regularly, not repaired endlessly. Medical treatment was prompt and systematic, administered without interrogation or delay. Work details were structured, compensated, and governed by the Geneva Convention. For men who had lived for years under constant deprivation, the predictability itself was unsettling. Letters home, though censored, revealed recurring patterns. Prisoners struggled to describe what they were seeing without disbelief. They wrote of cafeterias, of warehouses stacked to the ceiling, of farms where waste was unthinkable because surplus was assumed. Many had been civilians only years earlier, farmers, machinists, clerks. They understood production. They asked American guards about wages, shift rotations, crop yields, and factory output. At night, conversations in the barracks shifted away from ideology. They spoke instead of numbers, of scale, of systems. The war ceased to feel like a contest of will. It became a matter of arithmetic. By late 1944, U.S. Army intelligence reports noted a marked transformation among German POWs. Hostility faded, ideological certainty dissolved. In its place emerged a quiet, analytical resignation. Prisoners no longer asked when Germany would regain the initiative. They asked how America had built a system capable of sustaining abundance while fighting a global war. One intelligence summary observed that exposure to American living standards under wartime conditions had done more to undermine belief in German victory than battlefield losses alone. This realization was not imposed through propaganda. It emerged organically, through daily observation, through meals without ration cards, through trains that ran on time, through depots that were never empty. Germany could still fight, it could still inflict damage, but it could no longer compete. When the war ended, German prisoners returned home carrying more than the visible traces of captivity or the psychological residue of defeat. They carried with them an internal recalibration of how power truly functioned in the modern world. What they had encountered in the United States was not simply humane treatment or momentary abundance, but a coherent system in which production, logistics, agriculture, transportation, and administration operated in continuous alignment.
For men who had been raised in a political culture that glorified willpower, sacrifice, and ideological purity, this realization cut deeper than any battlefield loss. They had seen that modern war was not won by slogans or endurance alone, but by the ability to sustain complexity without collapse, to absorb strain without fracturing, and to maintain civilian life even while mobilizing armies on a global scale. They had observed day after day a nation capable of feeding their enemies without threatening its own stability, of training and equipping millions of soldiers without starving its cities, of sending men, machines, and food across oceans while grocery stores at home remained stocked. Distance, which had crippled European powers for centuries, was not an obstacle for the United States, but a multiplier. Railways functioned as arteries rather than bottlenecks. Farms produced not at the edge of survival, but beyond immediate need. Factories did not surge briefly and then exhaust themselves. They operated in sustained cycles, predictable and relentless. Abundance was not accidental. It was engineered, protected, and planned. The United States did not defeat Germany solely on beaches in Normandy or in forests like the Ardennes, dramatic as those moments were. It defeated Germany in places that rarely appeared on propaganda posters, in machine shops running 3 shifts a day, in grain elevators rising over the Midwest, in rail yards where schedules were kept regardless of weather or war, and in mess halls where food was served without counting. Victory emerged not from desperation, but from continuity, not from last-minute improvisation, but from systems designed to endure. For the men who stood silently in Texas mess halls in 1944, trays in their hands, the conclusion formed slowly and then all at once. No counteroffensive, no secret weapon, no act of courage could reverse what they were witnessing. The war had been decided long before the final battles were fought, decided in advance by capacity, by organization, by scale, and by a society that could convert its daily life into strategic power without breaking itself in the process.